morning, everyone. This is Rob from the Brand Safety Series, and we are really lucky today to have Durreen Shahnaz, who is the CEO of Impact Investment Exchange, IIX. And she's also an author of her new book called The Defiant Optimist. We were lucky enough to meet Durreen in Singapore at our Brand Safety Summit, and it's just really been a great experience meeting her, and we're so lucky to have her today. Hey, Durreen, how are you?
Good, Rob. Thank you for having me. It's great to be back in the States.
Awesome. Yes, and you're back in New York, and that's exciting. So we'll get to meet face to face again soon enough, and we'll be back in Singapore next year. So we'll see each other a few times in the next 6 months, and so that's exciting too. Well, Durreen, so just wanted to maybe a little bit of background. Please introduce yourself and explain IIX at the front end, just to give us a quick bit of color.
Sure. So I actually. So I'm an entrepreneur. IIX is my second company. Started it 14 years ago with the sole purpose of actually making finance do good. So really make finance work for the 99%. So I think, just to put it in simple language, if you see, we have the billionaires, the 1% of the global population, they have more wealth than 5 billion people of this planet put together. So really the purpose of this is taking the most influential system in the world, with the financial markets, and seeing how do we actually make it work for everyone. So that's really was the purpose of creation of IIX. And I have to say, with much humility and pride at the same time, that we have been able to really move the needle on that. So over the last 14 years, we have been able to put out in the market over $300 million, impacting over 100 million lives across Asia Pacific and Africa. So we're very proud that we have that last woman in the mile, working in the remote part in some village in Kenya or Philippines, now be a part of the financial system through our products and our services. So we're very, very excited about that. So it really, IIX is really about that.
Really, and
also, yeah. And then how do we kind of, make each one of us involved in that system?
It's really exciting stuff, and you've accomplished so much. But what motivated you to pursue this idea of impact investing and fight for the 99%? And how has that motivation evolved over the last few years, especially?
Right. Well, Rob, if you look at it, all the sort of the issues we deal with as a global, united population, which is, the climate issues. We deal with social inequalities, the unrest. It almost makes you kind of wonder to think back and say, okay, is all the solution really around politics, or is there really more that can be done? And really, so I leaned on that more can be done. And for me, it really was through the financial system and being able to bring the entire ecosystem around it. So yes, it was a very audacious goal, but for me, it really was my North Star. Growing up in a poor country, Bangladesh, when I was a child, for me, it really was the fact that how do we actually create that bridge of have and have nots, which goes beyond sort of philanthropy and charity, and really taking the financial system, the investments, and giving everyone the equal opportunity. So it's not about just, having your table and adding a folding chair, but actually creating a whole new table where all of us have our own chairs and we can sit there and have a voice and value. So that's kind of the, the philosophy behind it. And then really using very core and very serious financial tools, and using high finance for basically, as I like to say, for the low markets. And we have been able to do that. So I think it's really that motivation to create a more egalitarian and a more inclusive, system that works for all. And I think for us, a big focus for our work is actually women and gender minorities, as well as the climate. So we really are the nexus of it to make sure they are an integral part of the financial system, and having the right products and platforms and services to make sure that happens.
So wrapped up in the question of how has your motivation evolved, you define this term, and the name of the book is Defiant Optimist. Can you explain what it means to be a defiant optimist and how that blends into your motivation? please.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, the way I look at it, defined optimism, if you look at the words, the two words, they're almost like contradicting each other, right? You're being defiant, and that means that you are really coming from a setup where just, there's injustice and wrong. So there's some anger in it. But then there is optimism, which is full of hope. So it really is that contrarian view of the two. If you combine it together, and it becomes something really beautiful where this really a belief in the personal vision that you actually have a position, in the global consequence, and you really are a part of the solution, and you can ensure that the system that you're in, that it comes, it becomes inclusive and brings others in. So you're really part of a solution, not only just by tweeting about it, not just by being on social media, but really actually taking some actions around it and being able to do it. So guiding your North Star, but doing it in realism, doing it in action, doing it in with actual outcomes that impacts others. So that really is where the kind of the term came from, the philosophy around it. And it has worked wonders, for my life and the work that we have done.
When I think about it, when I internalize the term, is part of it also thinking about being able to persevere when the world is telling you no, the defiant part, thinking about how do you stay positive when people are telling you no? Is that a core? Am I understanding it correctly?
It is. But I think at the same time, I think, also understanding that it is rough, and there are moments that you just want to give up. But I think the reality is that's again when that grit and perhaps that again, that anger has to sort of kick in and say, damn it, you know what? I will do it. Because if I don't do it, it's not just a failure for me, but failure for millions. So I do really think it has to sort of go beyond the individual and saying, oh, I will make it, but actually saying, I will make it for a million others, and so that they can make
Yeah.
it. So I think that is, and that's a very core, being able to sort of think beyond yourself and thinking that if you give up, you're not just giving up for yourself, but many others.
Super powerful, and yeah, I can imagine and I can understand the idea that I'm not going to give up, but at the same time, there's a bigger mission here, and it's not really about me; it's about the mission, and so that I can't
Mhm.
give up, and being and going above it. That's inspiring. How do you work that into? So there's a couple of initiatives that you've launched specifically that are really exciting. They're named the Women's Livelihood Bond Series and the
Mhm.
Orange Bond Initiative. These are two
Mhm.
specific things you're working on. How does this defiant optimism principle work into the creation of these? And tell us a little bit about the initiatives as well.
Yes, happily, Rob. So it's very interesting. We talked about the philosophy. We talked about the big picture. We talked about sort of that soul search that happens in the process. Now let's put it in action. So for me, again, kind of being in the financial system, and then also, frankly, I mean, again, what we have in common, Rob, you also are from the financial system and media, and so am I. So what I did was I translated that, and I said, okay, so how does this now work in practice? How do I actually change things? So it really became about educating an ecosystem about a more inclusive financial system, how they will benefit from it, but then also using the small medium businesses, which are again owned mostly by women and gender minorities in general, and saying, how do we sort of use them as the vehicle to change the system, kind of empower them, because they're the ones who are always marginalized. So given that, we create this fintech platform where they can actually raise capital, and created structures around it, measuring the impact, the positive impact that they're creating, and also educating them, and then the potential investors, lawyers, accountants who'll be working with them. Now, the interesting thing is it worked, okay? But for me, the big thing was it almost felt like we were in this bubble where the bubble was growing, but too slowly. And I realized, you know what? Hold on. What I have done here is what we have done here is great, but what we still haven't done is being able to connect to that 1%, to that financial markets more effectively, where all this money, you know, over $160 trillion is sitting. How do we get to that? So this is where sort of I said, okay, let's sit back and let's think if we can create a financial product that we can sell to that market. So we speak their language, that we create a sophisticated product where these big institutional investors, these big investors who are sitting in New York and London, they can actually say, you know what, wow, all right, so actually I like this instrument. It's very sophisticated. When they dig in, they then see that, oh my God, there's actually these small medium businesses and across the emerging markets were behind this. So it really, that was the picture. And again, with a big focus on creating livelihood for women in the last mile. So we created this very sophisticated structure. We called it the Women's Livelihood Bond, and it was very, very interesting because um, again, it was, now it feels like, wow, it was, we put it together, but it almost took us, I would say, close to 2+ years to pull it together, to convince people, to convince various governments to come in to create all these, what they call in the financial market, de-risking. So they guaranteed it and so on and so forth. So at the end, we created this structure. We're pulling together a group of small, medium businesses. So we pulled them together, and imagine we basically created a united financial product, which we put out in the market and we sold it. And I think what was very interesting with that was it was the first time ever in the financial history where you actually had a financial instrument focused on women. It's publicly listed. And also all these big institutional investors came in. And very, very importantly, it was truly the first time where the connection happened between Wall Street and the back street. And it was an incredibly proud moment when I saw the bond being listed and came up on Bloomberg. And I remember I cried. I cried because of all the millions of women in the last mile who now were on the equal playing field as some fancy banker on Wall Street. Because you know why? Because they're the ones who are paying off this loan. And the reality is, you are on equal terms. It was no longer, I give you, so you're at the mercy of me, but it really is, we are in a business transaction, through this financial instrument. So it was quite remarkable, So for me, it really was my dream come true in creating that equal playing field. And after the first bond, which was just a pilot for 8.5 million, it just grew and grew and grew. And then last year, so we issued a bond every single year. Every single year, it was oversubscribed. So now we just issued the fifth one last December for 50 million, and now we're putting out a bond for 100 million. So close to $300 million in the market just through this bond. And the best part of this is that we never had a single loss. It's a zero loss. So which really means that if you had your money in this bond, the financial meltdown that has been happening, that happened here several times, the blips, you would have never have felt it. And again, it's because, tech stock and all of this will go up and down, fads will go up and down. But the reality is, that is a small percent of the world. The rest of the world is working hard in the field, working hard in running small businesses. And most of these people are women. Most of these people are minorities. Most of the people who are marginalized. And you know what? Their life is going on. And they, in turn, are now diversifying your portfolio because, for them, life is going on. They're outside the shocks of the financial system. So in a lot of ways, I would say we brought the soul back into finance. And it makes me very proud that we could do that.
It's incredible. It's incredible. And I want to unpack that a little bit because there's two parts to it. There's obviously the benefit of the proceeds piece, which is the, why did we do this, right? We did this because there's the benefit of the proceeds. But I think there's also some brilliance in the idea of collecting different constituencies, packaging them up, and then selling them as a single security because Wall Street can understand how to do that transaction.
Exactly.
Very smart.
Exactly.
Tell me a little bit about like the evolution of that piece.
For me, when I thought that, we have to create a sophisticated product. And I remember the epiphany I had was, and I talk about this, this beautiful scene. So I have two incredible daughters, and my younger daughter has a very rare genetic condition. And I remember, which she will have for the rest of her life. And I remember reading, because of course I'm one of those crazy mothers who have like, just everything that I can do for my child, what every mother does. But that anytime a child, or anyone with any kind of disability, for them the most powerful thing is to be able to actually control something else, because they can't control their body. And one of the big sort of psychologically, a big healer, believe it or not, is actually horses, riding. So I remember, again, it's a very posh, very expensive thing to do. And I really had to fight to get her into the Singapore government has a setup, so which is subsidized. So I got her into that. And I remember it did miracles for her, when she started riding. And I remember watching her riding. And it just came to me, the fact that, what? The financial system is like this horse, which, and in my child is like the group that we're representing, who don't have the ability to control what, a system. They really don't. So I actually need to create a way for the system to be changed so that they can control it. So, and I remember at the same time, the connection in my head I made was actually with Michael Milken. And for those of you in the audience, if you remember, and I know Rob, you know very well, yes, Milken actually probably went quite far on things that he shouldn't have, but he was actually a financial genius, in terms of the structures that he created in the market. And in the process, he actually brought in a lot of the minority groups into the financial market, who were basically before then were, cut out from the market. So I actually took a lot of flavors from the work he did, and I said, well, let's now sort of use that, for the group that has been cut out, which is again 99% of the world, into this system. So it really was, the impetus really was that, and creating that financial product and really learning from the past, of people like Milken who did that very effectively, but really sort of for us now using this for a more positive purpose. And I think the second part of your question, in terms of which you rightly sort of gathered, which is bringing an ecosystem together, we did that very, very effectively in every single country we operated in, and continue to operate in, because people have to feel like this is something that they actually will benefit from financially as well. So, I always say there's room for charity and philanthropy, absolutely, but it is very limiting, and the power dynamics is always very unequal. So for us to actually be on the equal footing, it's not just the investor and investee, but also it's the ecosystem around it. Just like in Wall Street, it's just not the bankers and the companies, it's actually the lawyers, the accountants, the trustees, etc. So we actually pull this whole ecosystem together through basically, education, and a lot of narrative through media as well. So again, this is where kind of the intersection of media, finance came in. And I think that really benefited us, because I always say, we not only sort of built a new car for everyone to ride on, but we actually created the highway as well, for that we can have many different cars on it. So that's sort of the process. And again, a lot of work, but definitely was worth it for us. And again, I talk about that in the book.
Amazing, amazing. And again, talk a little bit about the use of proceeds. So how was the funds that were raised? How were they used? I'm sure you talk about that in the book as well, but I'd just love to hear, you've created this great vehicle. Now you could successfully raise money. What's the use of proceeds?
The proceeds, the money, immediately we raise it, and given that it's a bond. So again, for the audience there, if you kind of have some finance background, you'll appreciate it. So with bonds, they're not funds. So we actually have to disperse it immediately within 24 hours. So each bond pulls together multiple countries, multiple sector, multiple small, medium businesses. So although it's US dollar denominated, we basically make the disbursement in local currency. So you can imagine, we get the money, we have to hedge it with the local currency. So when we're making that loan in India, several loans in India, we actually have to hedge it to Indian rupee, or in Indonesia to Indonesian rupiah, in the Philippines to peso. So we have an entire capital market system set up to hedge it. And once the hedging is done, again, we're talking about here now, kind of all happening in minutes, and then we disperse the money, to the small medium businesses, who then turn around and immediately disperse it to the women in small loans, or themselves using it to create livelihood. For example, if they are putting up solar panels in buildings, they actually have to be able to use the proceeds to not only put up the solar panels, but use women as workers. They have to train the workers and use women as the technicians, and then also be putting those solar panels up, in schools that have mostly majority women students, girls students, and also be working on issues that, again, with women and gender minorities, that influences them and creates livelihood for them. So I think what we do is, it's not only just the use of proceeds right away, but because they have to then pay the money back, right? So there has to be a revenue generating business. But also, very, very importantly, we actually measure the impact and making sure the proceeds are being used to create livelihood for women and gender minorities. And we actually do due diligence on that. And we verify it with the last mile, meaning that we actually ask these groups how their lives have changed. So it's very solid. And one of the things that happened in the process, and I think, again, as I said, we never had any default, is we also found out that the deeper impact you create, because we measure this impact, we have this whole tech platform which actually measures the impact, quantifies the impact, not only on the beneficiaries, but their families and the community, etc. That the deeper impact you have, it actually reduces risk. And again, it's no brainer, but in finance, we actually never talk about these things, right? So if you think about it, if you have a community where you actually now have small businesses that are working because they're getting the right capital, what will happen? All of a sudden, you'll see those families, they're actually now sending their children to school. The kids are actually having a better access to better health, education. And then there's actually a prosperity that starts, right? A cycle of prosperity within that community. And then also, that's a positive impact on the climate, because they're probably now, because we are requiring it, planting more trees. They're actually using more eco-friendly process. If they have a motorbike, they're actually now switching to electric motorbike, which again we actually monitor. So it really is taking money, which again, that is helping them grow their business. They're paying it back, but at the same time, they are kind of signing an agreement that they're going to be doing all this, creating livelihood, changing their behavior. And all of a sudden, you see that the money gets more secured as well, because they start seeing the benefit of it. And you, as the investor, actually are benefiting from that, because then you know that you're going to get your money back, because the business is prospering, the community is prospering, and deep impact reduces the financial risk. So it's actually fantastic. Again, prosperity and impact circle.
Macro and micro investing coming out of the
Yes.
fund to support small, medium businesses, women driven all over the world. I think you'll have no problem continuing to grow this. Just kind of hearing about it, it seems. I mean,
Right.
it is, like you said, it's a no-brainer, and it's the vehicle is really exciting. So congratulations.
Thank you.
It's very
Thank you. I
super
appreciate
cool.
that.
Yeah, very cool. So as a female entrepreneur of color from an Asian heritage, I know you describe your personal journey of perseverance. Can you tell us a little bit about it? I mean, listen, it's obvious when I talk to you, this is your passion. But tell us a little about your history and how you and how some of the biases that you've also learned about as you've been getting to this point have developed.
When you are a minority person anywhere, you almost have to be better than the majority in anything. So for me, it really was, going to the best schools in the U.S., trying to get in my foot in the most prestigious organizations, so have the right resume. But it was so interesting, even having done all that, when I actually became an entrepreneur with my first company, One Nest, which was here in New York, which was a global marketplace for basically handmade goods. It was the predecessor of Etsy. Um, I realized that all of a sudden, all these qualifications that I have, yes, perhaps it helped me open the door, but it actually didn't do anything much more than that. So it was actually a rude awakening for me that if you're actually now outside of a system, it is extremely difficult to break that path. And actually, I talk about that in the book. So if you're okay with it, Rob, may I read a section which actually touches on that?
Please,
Oh, okay.
please.
So I will. I actually have my manuscript, although the book is out. So I'm going to read it from my manuscript. It just makes it more kind of real. Um, so, it's very, very interesting because when I was doing this, the whole thing for me really was that, this is not just about, even when I was writing the book, it was not just about kind of me kind of going through this, but really being able to kind of maybe speak for a lot of other people. And maybe sometimes, again, when we have these biases that we don't even realize it. So with the book itself, what I try to do is, of course, talk about the work, all the things that we have done, etc., but also very effectively also make finance very approachable for the reader. So some of these things may seem very rudimentary, but you'll see what I have done when I start reading. So there's actually chapter 14, and the title of the chapter is "Who Will Put the Equity in Equity?" Okay, so I'll start reading. Raising money is the single most stressful aspect of starting a business. You have a short period of time within which you need to find the right contacts, convince those people that your business is worth backing, address their fears about risk, persuade them for all the good that will come out of the business, promise them incredible returns, and finally convince them to write a check. To start, you need to have the right contacts to raise money. Capital, as it's known in the financial markets. Because I interchange between money and capital, so they're both the same thing. Lack of contacts with investors kills many businesses at the inception stage, especially businesses founded by women and people of color, many of whom do not have inroads to the people who control the financial markets. In theory, the success of fundraising should correlate to the brilliance and and the solidity of the business idea and plan. In reality, though, investors are investing in you, the person, as much as they are in your idea. Sadly, investment decisions are often based on intangibles that incorporate implicit biases and invisible systemic barriers. Potential funders may not verbalize or even be aware of this, but they tend to trust entrepreneurs who look like them. If there's no incentive or obligation to do otherwise, people like to help people from their own tribes. These biases are concealed by a wonderful, flexible word in finance called risk. You, as an entrepreneur, can be deemed risky by investor and thus not worth supporting if you do not share their socioeconomic background, race, or gender. If instead of fundraising from an investor, you want to borrow money from a bank, you need to put up collateral such as your house or your car to de-risk the loan. So this again, Rob is my husband, Rob here. So I write down, Rob and I did not have any significant assets. So bank perceived a loan of a size we needed to be too risky. This meant I would have to raise equity capital. I would have to convince potential shareholders to give money to a business in exchange for partial ownership. I needed to find people who would be comfortable with me, believe in me, support my business. I reached out to friends and family to invite them to invest, and a few came in. Still, this was only a fraction of what we required to cover the technology and operational costs to develop on Nest. We needed more. So anyway, so it kind of goes on, but I think what you see, what I did with the book is kind of subtly I put in these issues that it is actually extremely difficult to break through into a system where when you're walking through the door and they immediately put you in a box, right? Because you're not of a certain race or gender. And immediately they think whatever you're going to say, it's kind of out there. Okay. So you have to kind of work with these biases. You have to work with all of that and be able to kind of say, how do I kind of break through? And it takes a lot of work and patience because trust me, the system is stacked up against you. So, but you have to kind of make it work.
A lot of the work. So you mentioned, we're raising money. We are coaching entrepreneurs We are funding entrepreneurs through this work. I mean, ultimately, we are taking dollars from larger institutions and sharing them through smaller businesses. The nexus of this work, as you mentioned, obviously women run, women owned. Beyond that is also the nexus of climate
Mm-hmm.
and also private public sector. Talk a little bit about the that part of it. You know, how you're fighting for climate change. And
Absolutely. So again, I think climate is kind of currently without anyone in this planet. We basically this has to be, and thankfully it slowly is becoming our primary concern. It has to be our primary concern. And if you think about it, this whole climate change, we none of us can run away from it. And what's happening, especially in the emerging markets, and especially in certain sectors like agriculture, which is again a big part of the emerging markets, and it's a big part of, frankly, even the economy, even in the U.S. The You see that certain sectors are being impacted massively through this climate change. The climate action is where is an imperative. So what we try to do is with our work, we make the whole climate action as one of the key determinant in terms of how the business should be grown. And again, we work a lot in the agri sector because again that represents agriculture itself as a sector. It has more women than men globally working at it. Obviously they're not compensated, but they are the ones who are working. And there also are, frankly, if you look at it in the emerging markets, the climate crisis is actually also creating a lot of climate refugees. And it was very interesting for me the other day. I was just reading now, with the fires in Canada. It was a very interesting story. Actually, it was in New York Times. I was reading it about how these people immigrated, from war-torn African countries, and they were saying that we basically have climate refugees and we're war refugees, and we come to Canada now again we're refugees. And that kind of, when I was reading it, and I was thinking, my God, I mean, of course, I mean, we're going to have, this is another new aspect that we're going to have, which is climate refugees, right, in every country. And what do we do about it? So I do think that climate has to be front and center with anything we do, like anything. And also, if you look at climate crisis, interestingly, it impacts women disproportionately more than men. And you'll say, how? Come on, we're all breathing the same air. Absolutely. But what actually happens with the climate crisis, it's actually a lot of the activities that women are involved with, those get impacted more. Case in point, we work a lot with, say, clean cook stoves. And why? Because of climate crisis, what has happened is now it is more and more difficult to get firewood, right? And on top of that, of course, it's not healthy for the planet to be using wood. It's not healthy for the human when you inhale the carbon monoxide. So what we have seen is, again, with the deforestation that has happened in a lot of these countries, like Cambodia is one of the top ones, um, the women have to walk further and further and further afield, and a lot of time it's actually the little girls, to get the firewood. And what means is their safety is in concern. They basically are, a lot of times, they go missing when they go to do this. They're physically abused, sexually abused. So again, this is just one small example. So for us, putting the clean cook stoves out there and are creating these biodigesters that we have in a lot of the villages, where they, again, the gas is then piped into the huts for clean cook stove. All of a sudden you're saying, okay, now they have a cheaper access to energy, but then also it's actually is creating safety, and a climate solution for these families. So again, where they, again, the girls are now safe, they don't have to go and collect the firewood. Similarly, we're seeing with water. Now on average, in most of the countries in the African continent, women, again, because women are the ones who have to go and get this water, they have to walk, believe it or not, it's crazy number, 8 to 10 hours to get water. That's insane. Just to, again, think about someone alone walking 4 hours somewhere to get water. carrying that thing on their head, again walking 4 hours back just to have one pail of water in the house. That's like criminal, right? That someone has to be doing that. So again, because of climate crisis, because everything is drying up. So how can we actually create solution? How can we actually create a refinery? The being able to actually use the water that they have and be able to uh, take out the pollutants, and for them, so that they don't have to walk 8 hours a day. So how can we actually use that and be, again, have a business solution around it? So yes, so climate and women really go hand in hand just because of the activities that they're involved in, and this is exactly what we are doing. And sadly, once again, our work, literally it is about climate action, but in terms of the mitigation, it's there. But I do feel, in terms of the mitigation, the developed countries have to take a lot of responsibility as well, because for those of us also in the developed country, we are the ones who created most of these problems. So I do think, in a bigger scheme of things, we have to be cognizant of that. And if we are sitting on the capital, we need to be deploying it the right way, so it creates a solution for the globe that we frankly kind of messed up. So yes, it definitely goes hand in hand.
How do you see the future of this type of investing, impact investing? How is it going to grow broadly beyond what you've started here?
Well, I'm very, very hopeful that it will continue to grow. But I think for it to grow, I would say equitably, we actually do need to make sure that impact investing does not become the neocolonialism once again from the developed country. And I say that because you can see the flavors of that sometimes happening, because you can't be sitting in New York, or London or Paris or Geneva, and basically say, I know the solution that is needed in some remote part, in Kenya, or India or Philippines. So we really need to make sure, once again, as the space grows, that we have equal voice, equal representation, and then also we have transparency. Because I think the big thing that's happening now is the fact that people are using this as a marketing scheme, especially on the ESG side, and there's a lot of washing happening. So there's a lot of greenwashing, there's a lot of impact washing. So you can actually prevent the washing if you actually are having an actual impact measurement system, which actually verifies to the last mile, and rather than just check boxes. So it's not good enough for you to just have a woman on the board check mark, but really making sure that you are benefiting with your services and your products, millions of women out there. And again, and also being inclusive about women, gender minority, the climate, and of all color and race. So I think we just need to be able to embrace that. And if it's actually extra cost, we see that as investment, not as cost, to be able to do that. So I do think all of those are needed for this to kind of move and grow more equitably. And so and I'm hoping that we can continue to push on that and play a role that it happens.
So thank you so much for sharing your story with us. We run the brand safety series, and it was so great to have you in Singapore. Post the event, you've had some opportunities come out of it. So please share a little bit about how we've been able
Yes.
to help. We want to continue to help. But tell
No,
us about how you've had some
absolutely.
successes so far.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you brought that up, because the brand safety summit for me, when I got it, invited to speak by David, my dear friend from my media days. um, I was very excited because it was the first time I could actually sort of talk in a public forum about the intersectionality of media and finance, right? Two big forces and powers. And frankly, that was sort of the theme of my speech. And it was very interesting because after that, Rob, we had several big tech companies approach us and basically say, how can we be part of it? Because that was also, we just launched a few months ago this whole movement called the Orange Movement. Orange being the color of the Sustainable Development Goal 5, which is for women and gender equality, for gender minorities. So basically saying we're going to have women and gender minorities in everything, in forefront of the financial markets. So these tech companies came to us and said, "Oh my God, what you're doing is basically DEI, and you're doing this so effectively, and you're actually being able to give it a value and bring it into the financial markets. How can we play a role? So what we are now doing with a couple of these tech companies is, and you'll see this in next couple of months, I'm very excited, is we are rolling out the orange seal, meaning the businesses who are actually are deep in DEI, they will, because we'll measure that impact and we will actually verify it, and they get the orange seal. So when the consumer is buying something from them, they know that this is an equitable company. That makes me so proud, because once again, it's just not the large companies, but it also the small, medium businesses. And all of a sudden, everyone, we're part of this orange movement of gender equality. And how wonderful is that? And it all happened because of you and David, for your brand safety summit. So you guys are heroes. So thank
Well,
you.
well, thank you. Yes. I mean, I don't. Listen. We're doing our part to give a platform. You're the hero, but making an impact and using what we do to help make an impact is important to us. And
No,
so
it's
I
a
can't. I mean,
wonderful
I'm thrilled
catalyzing
to hear.
moment. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm thrilled to hear that success, and I look forward to learning more about the Orange Seal and seeing how we can also continue to promote it and show it to people here, as we'll continue to share this. So Doreen, this was really great. I'm continuing to be impressed and inspired. Thank you for sharing time with us. Thank you for joining us for this interview. And we'll be sharing this with our audience. Take a look at this book. There's a lot to learn, and a lot to learn from Doreen. We'll be hearing more from her in the future. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Rob. And thank you, David. Thank you for everything. Take care.